Hi everyone. In this lesson, we are going to sketch out our ideas to design a 3D printable fish character. So, to make ourselves a cartoony little goldfish, some bug eyes, fin, and big mouth there. And we could do a lot of different types of details, or we like this fish. Come up with one with some teeth. And we can make a lot of variations on the shape of the fins. But when we come to printing, we're going to have to figure out how this is going to work. Now, if we wanted to make our fish something that could hang from something, an ornament, we could put a hole in his fin and use him to hang from something. But if we want it to just be a figurine that stands somewhere, it's going to need something to keep it from rolling around on its little round body. So we'll have to build it some kind of a stand, which means we're going to need a shape for the floor and something to hold our fish up so that it looks like it's swimming. We can place the fish right on top of some kind of rock. Fish there. Or, I think more interestingly, we can add to our fish some seaweed that's just touching it. So it looks like the fish is swimming. Let's give it a face so we can see which direction it's swimming. Whoop. Swimming through the seaweed. And the seaweed, being a solid object that touches it, will become part of it and allow it to look like it's just sort of swimming there. So I think that will be a fun design to try. Next, I'll show you what shapes we need to make our simple fish and our seaweed stand for him. And we are going to put together this swimming fish that is actually being held up by the seaweed. Let's go ahead and build our simple fish shape and then create a stand for him. Move my original example off to the side here. Let's zoom out a bit and let's get some shapes. I'm going to drag out a sphere for the main body of the fish, and I'll just give it a color. We're going to use this sphere to make his big bulbous eyes too, so I'm just going to duplicate it and raise it up a little bit, and then let's click on our color, change it white so we know it's the eyes. Let's zoom in a bit here so we can see our handles better. I'm going to hold down Shift and grab one of the corner handles and drag it towards the front of the fish. This way, all of the sides change size at the same time, and our eyeball here stays a perfect sphere. So now I'm going to rotate using my right mouse button around, make sure that I like the position of the eye. I want it to be more on top of his head, so I'm going to move it up with our up and down arrow. And now we've got a really sticking out, more of a frog eye here, so I think I'm going to move it in a little bit. I can use the arrow keys on the keyboard to move it back and forth, and left and right. And that seems good. It's quite a big eye. We'll give this eye a little bit of a detail. You could paint pupils on it later. I like to cut out a little area so that we can find that detail. And since I duplicated this, duplicate and repeat, we'll remember the move that I did to make this a higher up and smaller sphere. So if I click duplicate and repeat one more time, it's going to make us an eyeball on top of our eyeball. We can take our second eyeball here, click on hole, and now we will have a hole to cut out of our eyeball, make our pupil. All right. Now that we have one eye going, we're going to need to duplicate it and flip it over to the other side. So let's hold down Shift, click on the other sphere for the eyeball, and go ahead and group the two of them together so that we can cut that shape out. Make sure our cutout looks good. I like how it subtracted a whole little divot in there. So that looks good. We're going to go ahead and duplicate finished eye. Now that it's duplicated in the same spot, I want it to face the other direction on the other side of the head. So I'm going to go over here and click on Mirror. The mirror will change our handles to our mirror handles, and you can see that it's going to go back and forth, left and right, or up and down. I'm going to click on left and right here. Oops. It's easy to miss the handles and click on something else. Just click on our original here and mirror it once again. Let's make sure that I click on this handle. There we go. Now we can see that it's facing the other direction. So before I click on anything else, I'm just going to use my arrow keys to move it over to the right. Now I have two big eyes sticking out of the top of his head. All right. Now our fish needs a mouth. And for that, I'll go ahead and scroll down until I find the torus. It's a nice donut shape here. Now we're going to take our torus. I'll change its color just so that it matches. And we're going to rotate around the view. Remember, we can pan our view around with the middle mouse button, and we can rotate with the right mouse button. And looking at it from the side, I'm going to find that rotate handle. Click on that, and keeping my mouse inside the circle, I'm going to turn it to 90 degrees. So now we've got our mouth shape, but it looks quite a bit too big for our face there. So I want to keep it a perfect circle. I can change the size of this using the stats in here. You can see that the radius right now is 7.5. So I can go ahead and change this. A little hard to get an exact number when you drag up and down on this handle, but you can always click on the number and say, let's make it 5 instead. And now I want to attach it to the front of my fish. So hold down Shift, click on the fish's body here, and I'll click on the Align tool. And this will change our handles so that they line up the two shapes. But right now you can see that if I click on one of these, it's going to move the body as well as the mouth. I don't want the body to move because I like where the eyes are. So I'm going to click on the body, and all of my Align handles line up to the body. So now I can move the mouth to the front of the body and look at it from the side here. I want the height to be right in the middle. Now it's got his mouth right in the middle of his body. And I can click on an empty space, deselect, and now I can click on the mouth and move it around a little bit more to see how I like it. I think I want it to stick out more. Mouth's looking pretty crazy. All right, now our weird little cartoon fish needs some fins. So we'll keep it simple. We'll make the fins out of cylinders. I'm going to drag in a cylinder here, and we'll take our top handle and drag it down. I want to make it, well, we'll make it 2 or 3 millimeters. We don't want to make this so thin that the fins can break. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the number of sides up because I don't like quite how jagged this looks. You can turn it up to make a cylinder look a lot smoother. Then I'm going to want to cut out a piece so we have a nice sort of half or quarter moon shape, crescent for our fin. So I'm going to duplicate my existing one here. I'm going to turn the duplicate into a hole, and then I'll grab the handles and move it till I have a shape That I think I like for the tail fin. And just so that it isn't so annoying right here, where its surface is right on it, I'm just going to make it a little bit higher, push it down, and make sure that it cuts all the way through and we don't have one surface that is lined up perfectly with another surface, which can sometimes confuse Tinkercad a little bit. So now, my hole, you can see where it's shaded is the area it's going to cover up and remove. I'm going to go ahead and click on an empty space and drag this selection box around. Everything that it touches will be selected, so make sure you don't accidentally touch part of the rest of your fish. Let's just drag it across these two shapes. You'll see that you only have two shapes selected here. I click on Group, and we'll cut out our shape. So now I've got a fin that I'm going to use for all of the fins on the fish. So let's start by making his tail upright. So look at it from the front and see this rotate handle here. I'll keep it inside the circle again to make it exactly 90 degrees. And then I can just use my align tool to line them up again. So we'll click Shift and click on the body, click on Align, click on the body one more time so it doesn't move. And then we can move our tail up and into the middle. Click on an empty space to deselect. Click the tail again, and now that it's right in the middle, I don't want to accidentally move it to the side, so I'll use the arrow keys to nudge it over so that it's attached to the body. And we'll put another fin on the top and the sides by making duplicates of this one. So I'm going to duplicate my tail, and I'll raise it up a little bit, and I'll use my arrow keys to scoot it over into the middle. That's maybe a little bit too much fin on the top. So I'm going to go ahead and squash this down. It has just this little fin sticking out. All right. Now, if I duplicate this again, I'm going to get the same move and squash. So I want to click on an empty space, click on this again, and then I can duplicate it. And we're going to rotate it so it sticks out the side of the fish for our other fins. So we'll go ahead and click on the rotate tool and keep it inside. I think I will point it down instead of 90 degrees. I'm going to use my arrow keys to stick this fin out the side and use the up and down handle to move it down near the bottom of the fish. All right, now he's got a side fin there, and I want the same thing on the other side. Instead of doing that whole process again, I'm going to duplicate it, make sure that I don't repeat the move. I'm going to click on an empty space, click on the fin, duplicate it in the same place, and then back over to mirror. Just like the eyeball, we're going to go flipping it side to side. And then we're going to use the arrow keys to move it over to the other side of the fish. And if we want to be sure we're lining them up properly, we can use the flat view and click directly on one of the sides of the box here. So now we have everything lined up to the back. You can see much more clearly whether your objects are lined up or not. I'm going to go back to perspective view because I like looking at it that way better. And rotate around to make sure that all the parts of my fish are good. I think I like them. So we're going to select all of our fish parts, dragging a box around them, and group them together. And just so that I can see the colors I picked, I'll click on the solid here and change this, check this multicolor box. At this point, you could make this design. You need a lot of supports to print, and by himself, he'd probably stand up on his fins. Or you could punch a hole using a cylinder into him so that you could hang him from something. We're going to create a little stand that becomes part of him, so we'll print it all as one object. It'll look like he's swimming through some seaweed. So let's raise our fish up. And let's add a base underneath him by going down to the half sphere. Since it's already flat on the bottom, I can just stretch it out a bit. And we'll flatten it down a little bit. We have a nice wide base. He's not going to tip over. And I'll make it green. And just make sure that it is underneath our fish. And we're ready to add some seaweed. I think our fish is a little bit tall. I'm going to click on him and drag him down just a bit. And for the seaweed, I am going to use the scribble tool. You might look around in the shapes and find some other things that you think would be nice for a stand. You could even just put a cone that goes up and touches him so that he has his own little stand up there. But I'm going to create a slightly more plant-like shape by using the scribble. It can be really hard to draw something with a mouse, so you might have to do a little bit of practice with it. I am going to try to make something that looks vaguely like a plant. And we'll go ahead and click Done. Now we have our shape that has been extruded. So it takes our flat drawing and just stretches it out. I'm going to grab this and drag it in down to like 3, just like our fins. So it's solid enough that it's not going to fall apart or bend. And let's change its color so it looks nice. Let's go ahead and look at it from the side so that we can find our little rotate handle and turn it 90 degrees. And now, because it was on the ground, it's below there, so we're going to hit D on the keyboard. I wish there was a button, but we'll just have to hit D on the keyboard for drop. That is going to put the bottom on the floor. Now we can move our plant in there, and let's zoom out so we can see how it is attaching to our fish. So we don't want it sticking through him. We just want him to be touching. Let's stretch this out a little bit. And let's add some more, just so that there isn't only one piece of plant life around him. We'll go ahead and duplicate this, move it over to the other side. And when we look at it from above, we can rotate it around. You can see that it can get hard when you're far away to actually click on the rotate handle. Things can get a little bit wonky, so you can click on this or hit F to fit to view, and it zooms right into that shape. Ooh, it really wants us to click on the number here. So we'll go ahead and put 45 in there, and it'll rotate 45 degrees. And we'll make this one a little shorter, and we'll duplicate it again. I'll get another one that's been rotated and made shorter. And just to change it up, I can click on our mirror tool and flip it. So I have a couple of different pieces of plant material. We'll put one right under him so that he has a sturdy base holding him up. And maybe duplicate it again, just so that we can put some extra plants in there. You could also make several different plant drawings and duplicate a bunch of different scribbles to keep everything a little bit less like copies of the same thing. But as long as our stand is touching him, we're going to print him with all of these parts merged together as one object. So I'm going to go ahead and drag a box around the whole thing and click on Group. And since we picked our multicolor before, we're going to keep multicolor on, and you can see how our finished design should look. we will see what kind of supports we need to build and how we need to slice this guy to print. We are going to take our little fish character and put him into the slicer and see what we need to do to support him properly for printing. So first, let's make sure we have our whole shape grouped together. We'll click on Export. And we only want the selected shape, so I don't want my other example fish in there. And we'll click on STL. And then we'll open up our slicer. For me, I'm using Ultimaker Cura. And we're going to click on Open here and grab our fish. And let's zoom in so we can see this thing. The first thing we want to do is look around our whole shape, make sure that it came out the way that we expected it to. We have the bottom is completely on the floor, which is why it's highlighted blue. And we have some areas that are highlighted red because they face downwards, but they don't have anything supporting them. So we can see the undersides of our fins, the undersides of our mouth, and the fish itself. And while these little plant shapes will be enough to keep our fish looking like he's swimming when it's finished, they're not enough to support all of the areas that need supports for printing. I'll show you how that looks by just slicing it here without any supports. And we'll click on Preview. And we can see a color-coded drawing of all of the layers that we're going to print. So if we scroll down our layers, we can see that all of these parts so far are just on top of others. But as we get down here to the bottom of the mouth, there is what's called an island, where we have the lower part of the mouth here is separate from everything else. On this layer, we would be drawing some plastic just out in the air here. So it would fall straight down and we would get no part of the mouth until we got all the way up a few layers more to where it's connected. And that is why we need some supports. We'll have the same trouble with the tips of the fins. If I scroll down to those, you can see that right here we have our fin, and all of these parts of the fin are not touching anything else, which means the entire fin is an island, and it's not going to come out, it's just going to be making spaghetti. So we can click on our supports here, and because I want to make sure that the supports come out the way I want them, I'm going to click on Custom and scroll down. All right. From before, I'd already selected Tree, but by default, we have these normal supports. They're just called normal because they used to be the only kind of supports, and then the tree structure was invented later. So we'll try our normal supports and see how they look. We're going to be placing the supports everywhere, which means that on top of our big base here, we're going to add a support. So let's get this color coding back on. So you can see the blue lines are where it's going to draw supports, and the red is the outside edge. Green, yellow, and orange are all inside parts of our print. So in order to put supports underneath all of the areas of the fish that it needs, you can see that normal supports is going to build this entire structure wrapped around our plant area. And that is going to be nearly impossible to remove. We'll have to go in and use some cutting tools to trim all of these things out and get them out from in between our plant. Since that's going to be very difficult, let's go ahead and see how the tree supports will work. Tree supports are going to try to build a structure that looks a little bit like tree branches that grows up from the bottom. So because it's not making straight up and down lines like our normal supports, the tree is going to try to grow inward until it reaches the spot that it needs to support. Now our tree is only going to be connected right there where it gets underneath the fin and right where it's coming together to get underneath the mouth. And one goes all the way up here. Now, the preview doesn't quite show this very well, but you can see that the tree ends up underneath all of the edges that need to be supported. But instead of a solid box wrapped around our plant here, we'll have a much easier time trimming the tree out. Now, our other option would be to go ahead and cut this thing apart and put it back together later. Or we could print our fish separately and our stand and assemble them. But that would require going back and changing the design quite a bit. So we're going to see how well our little fish with its base prints using the tree supports to grow up underneath them.